Welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets podcast, and Hannah Went is in the house from TrueDiagnostic.com. Hannah has a lifelong passion for longevity and breakthrough, disruptive technologies that drive radical improvement to the human condition. And Hannah has also created Everything Epigenetics, where she shares insights on how DNA regulation has an impact on your health. And so Hannah has many things to speak about, like biological age, how to reverse biological age, and so much more. So, Hannah, glad to be speaking with you.
Thanks for the introduction, Robert. Happy to be here.
And happy to have you here. And so we gave a little bit of a quick introduction about you, but what's sort of the elevator speech? What has you passionate and focused and fired up lately?
Yeah, definitely the world of epigenetics. So a lot of people hear about True Diagnostic, my company, being a biological age testing company. And I would say we would definitely consider ourselves a failure if we were only a biological age testing company. We are an epigenetic testing company and really betting on epigenetics as the biomarker of the future. So we're super excited about it and how it can be rolled out in not only an integrative cash pay medicine space, but even just everyday medicine too.
Wonderful. So, what are epigenetics?
So epigenetics, it's modifications to your genome. So a lot of listeners or people may be more familiar with the term genetics, which is what you get from, 50% from mom, 50% from dad. But epigenetics is actually how your DNA is modifiable, right? Our environment that we surround ourselves in, more that nature versus nurture. So we can actually change the expression levels of our genes. It's usually thought of as the software of a computer, where the genetics would be the hardware, so to speak. So we're actually able to affect our genetic expression, thus lessen our risk for all types of diseases and even death itself.
This sounds amazing, but it also sounds a little scary just on the surface. And so you said like we can prevent diseases, but what's possible and why is it scary? Because I feel like I'm supposed to be scared of it, but I'm not sure why. So why is that? And what do people say when they first hear about this?
Yeah, so some people don't want to know. You're exactly right, Robert. It can be a little bit of a scary subject, especially since it's just so new. I'm the type of person who absolutely wants to know everything about myself, right? And I'm sure you may have heard the quote before by Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you're not measuring. So we need to be able to measure all these sorts of processes, specifically aging being that number one risk factor for every single chronic disease and death, in order to manage it, in order to mitigate it, and again, lessen those risks. So, it really comes down to the question if you want to know or not, right? You definitely don't have to get tested, but I think in the future we'll absolutely see epigenetics being the avenue for all type of biomarker testing, just because of its very easy sample collection, the cost is relatively low, and all of the insights that it can give us as well.
And can you walk me through it a little bit? Like you say that the testing is simple and easy enough. And what are the tests and what are we testing for?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really have two products here at True Diagnostic. One is called the Complete Kit and one is called the True Age Pace Kit. So I recommend everyone do the Complete Kit if you want to test as a baseline. This is an all-comprehensive test that gives about 20 different reports, over 100 different insights, even things like how much you've smoked or drank across your entire lifetime. We tell you how you're aging, some disease-based risk as well. And in that particular product, we measure about 1.2 million different DNA methylation markers. But here's where the secret is, Robert. The secret is how you're interpreting that raw data and that raw information, right? That's where we create a lot of IP and really unique, published, available, validated algorithms with our university and academic partnership. So that's really the value, is how we're interpreting that raw data for outcomes and how predictive we can actually make those outcomes. So most people start with that Complete Kit, and then they'll follow up with what we call the True Age Pace, which includes one of our algorithms, the Dunedin Pace, or Pace of Aging, we created with Duke and Columbia University, and a telomere length report as well. So that one you can test a little bit more frequently. So we kind of created a product to give people the ability to do that.
Well, wonderful. And so I did a podcast for this show a few days ago, and I had someone who was mentioning this thing about like the telomere length and things like that. And so, like, can you explain, so these reports come out, right? And it seems like a lot to sift through. So are there specific things that like always come up or that people are looking for? Like you mentioned about like the lifetime of like drinking and smoking and aging, but like what are kind of the common factors from all this testing?
Yeah. So we do include telomere length. I will say, unfortunately, telomeres aren't our favorite because they're not related to as many clinical outcomes as some of our other algorithms, but they're still a good guide for some things. However, that's what I spend most of my days doing is training our healthcare provider network on how to interpret these tests and what they mean and, what they should do from a lifestyle supplement, even medication or procedural based therapy in terms of an interventional treatment plan and then testing, afterwards. So the trends that I really notice is most people are aging quicker, right? Usually not doing the best for our health in our younger years, which puts us at almost a detriment, in terms of being able to age a little bit better during those older years. So we almost start kind of behind the line, right? And we need to catch up and kind of overcorrect and fix those things that again may have not been so positive for our health that we did when we were younger, whether it is too much alcohol consumption, smoking, cigarettes, maybe it's not getting enough sleep, maybe it's having really bad nutrition, not exercising enough. So if there's one trend or one takeaway, it's really that we do have to do those lifestyle factors correctly. We have to put in the work in order to regulate the expression levels of our genes for better outcomes.
And it all seems like common sense, but also easy to not implement it, right? And just that
Yeah.
whole, like, it's like the lagging indicator where in your 20s, your body's indestructible and it almost doesn't matter what you throw at it. But then it's kind of like when you have the thirsty feeling, it's like you're already dehydrated. So we should have been taking care of our bodies this whole time and exercising and eating right and drinking water and doing all these things. But I guess the second best thing to doing that is to then playing catch up now. And so when these reports come out, like, what's kind of the action to be taken? Is it just take care of our bodies or look out for this like type of cancer, or can the mention about like the DNA being rewritten? So is that a sort of thing that you jump into?
Yeah, absolutely. So the new algorithm we just created with our partners at Harvard, it's called our new Omic M age. It actually, the algorithm itself, right? We created the study, but the algorithm itself chose 36 total clinical lab values, proteins, and metabolites that affect that overall Omic M age. So again, this is brand new. I think maybe this is the first time I've ever even spoken about it publicly like this. But this is an algorithm that is fundamental and is the best predictive biological age clock ever created. But now we can actually tell you why you're aging too. So that used to be, I would say, maybe something the field was lacking in order to give you more direction, right? We can all make those epidemiological correlations in those statements. But now with this new algorithm we can actually pick and point to why certain people may be aging according to the clinical lab values, metabolites, or proteins that were reported out through the epigenetics, through the DNA methylation, those on and off switches that we're testing on your DNA.
Amazing. And so, we've talked about some of these kind of ideas and facts and figures and things like that, but stories are what's the most fun on a podcast. So do you have any sort of like case study or success story of someone like using this kit and going from getting tested, figuring out the problem, and then taking some action to fix up their health?
Yeah, I probably hate to change the conversation about this one case study that probably a lot of people have heard of on this podcast. But are you familiar, Robert, with Brian Johnson by chance?
No.
So we created a Olympics with him. It's the Rejuvenation Olympics. So he used to own Braintree, Venmo, sold that. So it's the crazy guy who spends all of the money on his health care to, perform these kind of rejuvenation techniques. But Brian Johnson was just sending us samples. We didn't know who he was before we partnered with him. And he actually reversed his pace of aging, that algorithm, the Dunedin pace we created with Duke and Columbia, by I think about 15% within a 3 to 6 month window. So he then approached us and we created this Olympics where the goal is to not cross the finish line, right? Don't die, quite literally. So it's this really healthy, fueled competition where people can now submit their results, those 3 pace of aging tests, with the first and third being at least 6 months apart. And then we can see how much we can actually reverse it. So now I know Brian's been moved to, I think, 6th or 7th place. Now the person who's in the first place saw a 25% reversal in terms of reduction in that pace of aging. And the reason I bring up this case study is because, there are a lot of unique opinions people have out there about Brian Johnson. He's made a wave in the longevity space. However, everything that he does is public. He keeps it on his website. I think it's Blueprint. Brian Johnson or something, you can Google it and it'll be the first thing that comes up. Granted, he's spending a lot of time and a lot more money than probably most people have on really attacking his health. But he does explain how it can start with just really simple lifestyle habits. And he pushes that he's put in the work, the time, the effort, the money for you to only do 0.01% of that.
We're living in just an amazing time to be alive, right? Where these
Yeah.
guys that have all this money and all these weird hobbies and all this time, and they can kind of be the guinea pigs for us, and we can see what to do and what not to do. And so, when you're mentioning some of these things that you're doing, like clearly you have a lot going on, right? And you mentioned about how a lot of your day is spent on training others how to like analyze these reports, and you're spending time here doing the publicity and doing things like communicating about this gamification. And so do you give any thought, or is it deliberate, about maybe like the ratio or the pie chart of how your day is spent? Like, do you find yourself fighting or trying to reduce the time I spent doing the work and more time like delegating others? Or just tell me about how your brain cuts up the day and deals with time management.
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's so interesting hearing what people spend most of their time doing, right? That's their life. Right now, I do spend most of my time on the phone. I don't think it will ever change in terms of training, right? And just making those connections with our healthcare providers and our distributors, international distributors, other opportunities that we can create, more business that we can create. So I don't know that will ever go away. But we are, I do spend some of my time really diving into our tech and making our tech seamless, making sure the processes and the logistics are flowing as needed, whether it's something with our laboratory, right? We own our laboratory as well in Lexington, Kentucky. So we have our own proprietary LIMS, laboratory information management system, where we're running and tracking the samples through in a de-identified fashion. So, where are the pain points? Where are the bottlenecks in that? How can we be more efficient? But I would still say I'm probably on calls, I don't know, 75% of the week, Monday through Friday, maybe 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. even, especially with us releasing that new report, that new omic image we created with Harvard. It's a lot of retraining our healthcare providers who want to learn more, because the thing about epigenetics is, as exciting as it is, it's so new, the resources are so limited. So we're definitely still even leading the education in the field as well.
And I find that really, really helpful in that, because I'm trying to digest what you're saying here, is that one part is it's like a common factor from hearing about people that do these sort of scaling secrets is like running circles around the processes and always refining the processes. And you hear that about like McDonald's early on, or like the Wright brothers. The secret to them having a plane that worked was they just kept on tweaking and kept on trying different things and making all those small little adjustments that added up to a lot. And then also there's this aspect of you just keeping all these relationships going, right? You're not saying that you're just sitting at your desk doing work. You're actually like on the phone communicating with others. And do you have any sort of advice or insights about stepping up maybe when you don't always feel like it? Like, I'm sure there's some days when you say, oh, I need to make 52 more phone calls, need to pick up the phone again. What do you do on those days when what you have to do, but it takes all like the courage and the discipline and all that to kind of do what needs to be done? Do you have a secret, or do you have a way of pushing through when other people don't?
Yeah, I think I walk out of work every single day and think, where did the time go? Right? There's not enough hours in the day. I truly think that. But in terms of advice and, getting through it and feeling like you've done something, everything you're doing matters. Every connection you're making matters, whether it's a presentation, PowerPoint, Zoom call with 50 doctors, with 100 doctors, or you're answering a support phone call or a support email. They are still a customer of yours, right? You're still educating one person who can go out and educate the masses. I forget what the way of thinking is called, but it's like, if we always think we can go back in the past and change one thing and then it'll change the outcome, right? But we never think about anything we do right now and how that can change the future. So what you're doing absolutely matters. It may be a little bit more tedious, or maybe, you don't want to answer the next phone call, even though, you have to and you have 50 more. Probably the best advice is to just keep going. It'll be it'll get better and you're definitely making a difference.
It's called the butterfly effect, right?
Butterfly
Where
effect.
if you
Yeah, thank
went
you.
back and changed one thing, yeah. And that sort of thinking, that really impresses me because there's people like Mr. Rogers or like President George Bush number one would make it a point to set aside time every day to send out like handwritten letters and things like that, just contacting people one at a time. And it's like, you're the president or you're this person that runs this huge TV show and yet you still find the time. So I'm just going to file that away in that mental filing cabinet, that every connection you make matters and it's really important to push through and that it all counts. And so because we're on a podcast here and we've heard some cool stories, the most interesting stories I think are those of failures. So in these companies that you've been doing and the science that you've been doing, you hear these things about how science is like 85, 90% all these failures. So is there an interesting failure that you feel like sharing with us today?
Absolutely. I think there's been many failures in True Diagnostic, but if I could, I would probably talk about maybe what pushed us to create True Diagnostic, which was a previous failure, right? So before True Diagnostic, we owned a pharmacy company that specialized in peptides and really unique products. We were the fourth fastest growing healthcare company in the US and grew really, really quickly. We grew so fast, we actually got a lot more attention from the FDA and kind of, which do not tend to like compounding pharmacies because of the nature of the compounding itself, being able to create almost anything. So we, I would say, really got knocked in terms of only then being able to offer FDA-approved drugs and compounded products. So as we had that pharmacy, we actually said, wait a second, we want to prove to the FDA that not only people feel better from these peptides and these, really unique products that we're doing that may have smaller amounts of research on it, but we want to objectively tell them that it's making them better and reducing aging. So we're kind of creating, what we know now as True Diagnostic when we still had the pharmacy, but didn't know it quite yet, because we were wanting to test aging. We were wanting to prove that these peptides can help reduce that factor. Long story short, we ended up selling the pharmacy, which in hindsight, we were, extremely sad about and would see that as a failure because we couldn't kind of push through there. But happy that it happened because now we have True Diagnostic. We've been in business for 3.5 years and have the largest private epigenetic database to date, creating and running over 35,000 samples.
Powerful and helpful that
Yeah.
sometimes you have to get rid of the good to get the great and all those sorts of things, and that sometimes the frustration that you have today may lead to some other sort of future business that you end up building tomorrow. And so we've mentioned kind of in passing here a few of your scaling secrets, right? We mentioned about relationships and about just putting in the time and the effort and to having your processes really figured out. And so as far as just actively, deliberately talking about scaling your business, is there any like specific like superpower you think you have? Is there something that you have done really well as far as scaling this company that maybe is not discussed enough?
Yeah, I think the connection piece again, it got really, I think, repetitive at the beginning, where I was like, oh, I'm having the same conversation, right? And speaking with all of these providers, but all separately. How do we streamline this? And I still think the one-on-one is just so important, right? Being able to text your healthcare providers. I have the best relationships with the ones that I text, healthcare providers in my case, because that's who I'm serving and that's who my, clientele is. But I still think it's powerful to make that connection. Once I realized I was creating this environment and these people relied on me, they trust me, they come to me for recommendations. That's when things changed for me and it clicked. And I was like, oh, I'm actually creating this really unique group, this niche audience. I would say one thing that I definitely wish that we would prioritize a little bit more is definitely kind of UI UX technology piece, right? The epigenetics, it just changes frequently. We could come out with new reports every single day. But I would say we want to definitely build our tech stack a little bit stronger and have more assets for that.
Okay, so you have goals and dreams that you are aspiring to. You know what you want to do next as far as leveling up. And I really like that lesson as far as making sure to make the one on one a priority and to even like push the envelope and do a little bit more of that. And that pays off just in pretty much, I think, any business and life situation. You're giving me flashbacks to like when I was in Boy Scouts and we couldn't get people to show up at meetings. I would just make the phone calls and it was a pain in the butt. And school clubs in high school and even after that, just any time when, and even like what you're doing right now, right? We're doing a one-to-one podcast. And so
Right.
that's so underrated, is just seeing like, okay, well, it would really suck if your whole entire like 8 to 12 hours a day was all this one-on-one stuff. But even if you're deliberately every day doing some amount of one-on-one, it's probably a heck of a lot more than the average person is doing, which maybe is zero or just above zero. And so we need to be doing more one-on-one. And as far as what you were doing, as far as someone who wants to know more about epigenetics and this testing, and there was, you mentioned like there's the whole test and there's the age test. And so what's this all about? Like, where can someone find out more? What are the companies? What are the websites?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're wanting to test or just wanting to reach out, it's True Diagnostic, TRU, and then diagnostic is singular.com. So truediagnostic.com. You can reach me personally on my email, Hannah, HANNAH, at truediagnostic.com. And if you're ever interested in learning more about epigenetics, I have my podcast called Everything Epigenetics as well. So you can follow me on social or listen to some of the episodes and the researchers I speak with there.
Wonderful. So that is Hannah with an H at truediagnostic.com. And you are staying on brand as far as the one-to-one and being accessible. And then you say the podcast is Everything Epigenetics. And so since you know podcasting, it's good to have the long form stories, but also to have the short form sound bites, especially as we're wrapping up. That way we end with a bang and not a whimper. So if I were to ask you about a favorite quote or lesson you have, you already met as far as for soundbite purposes near the end, and also to just end this conversation really powerfully, what comes to mind as far as a favorite quote or lesson you have?
Yeah, I think one thing where I can tie my position back to even more of a lesson is be kind to yourself. I know how cliche that sounds, but we even know on the cellular and the epigenetic level that speaking kinder to yourself, being in a positive mood, having that positive energy, it's contagious and it's actually going to express your genes in better ways, thus hopefully reversing that biological aging a little bit further. I know it's just such a stressful environment that we work in nowadays. So anything to help, change that outlook and be more positive would be my one piece of advice.
I love that. Be more positive and be kind to yourself, and especially because you say there are the health benefits, but also you live longer. Would you want to live longer and be miserable? Wouldn't you rather live longer and be happy? And I think about that idea all the time, that it's so easy in your internal voice to be so mean to yourself and to say nasty things that you would never say to literally any person, not even your worst enemy. So I love that advice. Be kind to yourself, especially as you are going to Everything Epigenetics and TrueDiagnostic.com. And thank you very much, Hannah, for being kind to us and being generous with your knowledge and sharing with us some of these exciting innovations you have going on. I really appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Robert.